Akira Kurosawa's Ran was released in 1985 to critical acclaim. Set in feudal Japan, it tells the story of Hidetora Ikemonji, an aging warlord who decides to abdicate and divide his kingdom amongst his three sons, Taro, Jiro and Saburo. Although the similarities with Shakespeare's King Lear are numerous, Kurosawa only became aware of them after he had started pre-planning. His initial ideas had stemmed from the story of a 16th century Japanese warlord, Mori Motonari. Throughout Kurosawa's film, one woman stands out as a quite extraordinary, manipulative, powerful force of nature, Kaede. Following the death of her first husband, Hidetora's eldest son Taro, she violently seduces the second son Jiro and begins to control the fate of the entire Ikemonji clan. However, unlike Goneril and Regan and Lear, Kaede has a strong motivation for desiring the downfall of Hidetora and those closest to him, as this essay will show. So what do King Lear and Ran reveal about the nature of female power within their respective contexts? And what additional insight can be gleaned by looking at the two texts comparatively? Stay tuned, you're watching Schofield on Shakespeare. Different stages of both texts see women in positions of ultimate power, positions in which they can make or influence decisions that will impact upon the well-being and future of entire communities. But of course, Goneril and Regan in King Lear and Kaede and Ran obtain their power through very different means. In Shakespeare, the two evil sisters effortlessly attain power through a few simpering phrases, by playing ball and sucking up to their old father, who has inexplicably decided to abdicate. Minutes after Goneril has brazenly vowed that her love makes breath poor and speech unable, and Regan that she is alone felicitate in your dear highness's love, the pair find themselves in the pleasing situation of being in charge of the kingdom, along with their husbands. Kaede in Kurosawa's Ran finds herself in a very different position. Hidetora Ikemonji, the aging samurai warrior equivalent to Shakespeare's King Lear, has also stepped down from power, but he has sons, not daughters. Kaede is the wife to their eldest son, Taro, and is left vulnerable when he is killed. Alone with the second son, Jiro, she rages, "What concerns me is my own future. I won't be a widow with my hair cropped, nor a nun with my head shaved. This castle was my father's. I won't leave it." The social conventions are clear. The outlook for a Japanese widow in 16th century Japan was grim. Most likely she would be turfed out of her home, forcefully stripped of a key device for attracting a partner, her hair, and denied the possibility of remarriage or a fulfilling independent future. That Kaede is able to strategically move from this apparently barren, powerless position to controlling the fate of the House of Ikemonji is an astonishing achievement. So, from such a perilously vulnerable position, how does Kaede become arguably the most powerful figure within the film? Well, a key factor within her ascent to power is her unpredictability, her ability to shock and resort to violence. Alone with Jiro, her brother-in-law, and the new head of the House of Ikemonji, initially she seems feminine restraint and deference personified. Placing her dead husband's helmet on the ground and referring to her previous public complaints that Jiro shouldn't have worn it so soon after her husband's death, she says, She kneels respectfully, speaks in a quiet, calm voice, and bows towards Jiro to indicate reverence and duty. But look how she changes within the blink of an eye, just over a minute later, as she goes forward to give Jiro the helmet that is rightfully yours as the head of the House of Ikimonji.
Jiro殿、このKaedeめくらではありませぬ。Jiro殿は親を狂わせ、兄を殺し、この国を盗まれた夫の仇、確保。
It is the totally unexpected swiftness in Kaede's transformation that surely catches Jiro, a seasoned, brutal samurai warrior from a family of brutal samurai warriors, unaware. In a single second, she has dropped the helmet, seized Jiro's sword, and pinned him to the ground, with the sword closely pressed to his neck. Jiro is stunned, and this unforeseen physical dominance from a female signals the beginning of his own diminution of power and masculinity. Whereas Kaede's vulnerable position as a widow leads to her subverting expectations about female passivity by resorting to violence, in King Lear, Goneril and Regan show a disconcerting ease with and even enjoyment of violence to maintain their power. In Act 3, Scene 7, the two sisters discuss how the Earl of Gloucester should be punished for providing information to enemy forces. Their brutal brevity is striking. Following Cornwall's command for the traitor Gloucester to be sought out, Regan cries, "Hang him instantly," followed by Goneril's, "Pluck out his eyes." There is a kind of ghoulish relish in their words, and no doubt whatsoever that they positively look forward to a former ally being gruesomely tortured. Both women use gleeful imperatives, hang and pluck, and make no attempt to mask their desires within longer, more convoluted phrases. Given the expectations for women both in Shakespearean England and, to a lesser extent today, they were expected to be meek and submissive and were legally dominated by men. Goneril and Regan's naked cries for violence are shocking and uncomfortable representations of the potential dangers of power in the wrong hands, male or female. But of course there is a difference between cacophonies calling for violence and committing the violence yourself. It is Cornwall who plucks out Gloucester's eyes and is merely egged on by his wife, albeit with incomparably bloodthirsty relish. Nonetheless, Regan shows her own willingness to commit acts of violence later in the same eye-gouging scene when, outraged by what she sees as impudence from Gloucester's servant, she takes a sword and runs at him from behind. The first servant is killed, but the preposition "behind" confirms that this is a cowardly act, with the victim having no chance to protect himself whatsoever. Unlike Kaede, Regan does kill, but she remains a far less terrifying potential proponent of violence. Whereas Kaede eyeballs the most powerful man in her kingdom, pins him down and draws blood from his neck through a samurai sword, Regan merely viciously and verbally backs up her husband and cowardly kills a social inferior she dismisses ruthlessly as a dog and a peasant. But Kaede's power doesn't just come from this moment of brilliantly timed brutality. Long before this scene, she has been building up her power base by ensuring ruthless control within her own domestic sphere. Take the moment she arrives at the first castle with her female retinue, just after Hidetora has conceded power to his eldest two sons. She finds that Hidetora's concubines are blocking their route. She takes decisive action.
その道を遮る作法があろうか。
はっ。And so there is no period of adjustment, no sense of compromise or allowances made for seniority. Now that Hidetora has ceremoniously passed on overall control to her first husband, Taro, Kaede must publicly become the mistress with immediate effect and never mind the humiliation of others. Hidetora notices the subsequent indignity of his women kneeling to Taro's wife and is furious, describing it as intolerable. For this, of course, is Kaede's intention. As a 16th century Japanese women within a macho, violent society, there are little or no opportunities for personal advancements. Alternative, more manipulative routes need to be taken. Kaede is well aware that Hidetora will be humiliated by this visual representation of the transfer in power, but it allows her to begin the process of diminishing his power and influence as rapidly as possible, and thereby increasing her own via her husband's. Kaede's act of ensuring Hidetora's women make way for her own is a subtle, indirect challenge to the old ruler's authority. It is not a direct criticism or confrontation, but a deliberate act intended to wound pride. In King Lear, Goneril and Regan use the same technique to undermine their father when they team up to whittle down the number of knights he should bring with him to their respective homes. In the latter stages of an increasingly heated exchange, Goneril questions her father, "What need you 5 and 20, 10 or 5 to follow in a house where twice so many have a command to tend you?" Regan then joins her sister to fatally issue these 3 words, "What need 1?" On a superficial level, these rhetorical questions are practical. How many knights is it reasonable and necessary for Lear to have with him? But on a deeper, far more significant level, this discussion is about the symbolic transfer of power. Goneril and Regan dare not directly criticise their father himself, whom it is clear they do not love dearer than eyesight, space and liberty, but know that by first criticising his knights and then reducing their number, they can ram home his own loss of power and reduced position. Lear, of course, has never even contemplated the possibility of his authority being undermined. Why would he? He is a superhuman dragon. And he storms off from both daughters into a storm where he rants and raves and ultimately finds out what it means to be human. And so, indirect challenges to male authority can result in a consolidation or increase of female power. These challenges can be especially effective when the females work in tandem, as Goneril and Regan do in Act 2, Scene 4 of King Lear. Kaede in Ran is a lone female operator, but is similarly adept at indirectly wounding through subtle, manipulative language. She coerces her husband Taro into organising a family gathering, in which her father-in-law's power can be formally diminished. Hidetora duly enters and is astonished to see Taro and Kaede sitting on a raised level, clearly expecting him to sit below them, which would symbolically and humiliatingly represent his own newly conceived subordination. Kaede, seeing Hidetora's bemusement at the setup and continued failure to sit down and thus symbolically accept his inferior position, is the first to take the initiative. Oh.
父上様、まずそれ。
この下座がわしの座か。そちはこのわしを何と心得ておる。
わらの夫のお父上と。
Kaede's adjective, honourable, apparently shows deference, yet the pointed positioning of fatherhood in relation to her husband emphasises where the power now lies, and sets up a platform in which Taro, who has surely been prepped by Kaede beforehand, can outline her revised expectations. Kaede seems polite and respectful, but beneath her words lie a steely determination to reinforce her own power. There is no question that Kaede's control of her domestic sphere extends to domination of both her husbands. By ruthlessly reducing Hidetora's power, she is effectively gaining power herself because she is astonishingly successful at controlling her husbands. This is first seen in the film when Kaede is alone with Taro following Hidetora's abdication and their move to the first castle. Taro wanders contentedly from a window overlooking lush and expansive terrain and sighs.
Kaede。我が物と思うてみると、この景色がまるで違うて見える。
Taro is smiling and looks smugly complacent as he says these words, but Kaede remains seated on the floor and makes no reassuring back-channeled response. Instead, she points out that a banner is no longer hanging in the room. Speaking slowly and deliberately, she says,
甲冑はともかく馬印は殿、あの馬印は一文字家の棟梁のもとにあるべきもの。
では大殿の名と形だけは今まで通りとの仰せゆえ、
形がなければ影だけ。
Kaede's words strike at the very heart of Taro's samurai identity and deflate his complacency and initial enjoyment of his new position. The metaphor, a shadow, suggests hurtfully that her husband is somehow not whole, not substantial, not a proper man, and echoes the fool's response to Lear's melodramatic question in Act 1, Scene 4 of King Lear. Who is it that can tell me who I am? Lear's shadow. The implication in Shakespeare is that Lear has lost his vitality and potentially his humanity with his foolish abdication of power, whereas in Rand, Kaede is implying that without asserting full rights and emblems of power, Taro will never attain the authority she presumes on his behalf he desires. Kaede's words are effective. Taro's mood shifts from smug to on a mission. Chaos ensues as Taro and Hidetora's men squabble over the banner, indirectly resulting in one of Taro's men being killed by Hidetora himself. Discord within the house of Ikimonji is what Kaede desires most of all, and she begins to achieve this through her master manipulation of her husband. Goneril in King Lear also attempts to get her own way through targeting her husband's masculine identity, although she is not as successful as Kaede, partly because her husband Albany has a deeper moral integrity than either Taro or Jiro. In Act 1, Scene 4, she refers to her husband's milky gentleness, an image which aligns Albany more closely with nurturing child-rearing than a manly figure of authority, and therefore aims to propel him into more ruthless actions with regards to his raging father-in-law. Shakespeare uses a similar phrase in Macbeth, when Lady Macbeth seeks to manipulate her husband into murdering Duncan. Yet do I fear thy nature, it is too full of the milk of human kindness to catch the nearest way. Lady Macbeth's words go further than Goneril in explicitly alluding to what she expects her husband to do. The nearest way to become king is for Macbeth to kill Duncan. Yet Lear's eldest daughter persists throughout the play in targeting Albany's masculine identity, although it is never as effective as either Lady Macbeth's or Kaede's. In Act 4, Scene 2, following Albany's appalled tirade against her treatment of her father, Goneril retorts, "Milk-livered man!" and later, "Marry your manhood, Mew!" Both explanations attempt to belittle her husband and suggest that he is cowardly, milk-livered, and somehow unworthy of the masculine sex. The second exclamation is particularly memorable, with a pounding, scornful, alliterative M's, and the mew sound imitating that made by a cat, thereby suggesting her husband is effeminate. However, Albany is resolute and agrees to lead his army, not following pressure from his wife, but because this business touches us as France invades our lands. Jiro, Kaede's second husband in Ran, also finds his authority and security threatened by potentially hostile forces, whereas Albany independently decides that the invading force needs to be fought. Kaede shows her power over her husband by manipulating him into adopting tactics that will ultimately destroy him. Jiro's right-hand man, Kurosawa, advises his leader that it's time that we strengthened our country by not fighting. Jiro clearly agrees with this view and repeats it to Kaede, telling her forcefully, " To the detached observer, Kaede's tactics are transparency itself. Her use of words such as strong, fear, and earlier, weakling, are aimed at emasculating Jiro, unsettling him into an unwise assertion of power and strength. He is a samurai warrior, and strength lies at the very heart of both his personal and his cultural identity. Kaede knows that Jiro cannot abide the thought of being perceived as weak. His identity depends so heavily on confirmation of strength, and so Jiro ends up instigating a disastrous attack which results in the slaughter of the majority of his men, and ultimately himself. Have a quick look at the ultimate consequences of Jiro acceding to Kaede's instructions. So Kaede in Ran gains power and influence through her ability to manipulate men, target their weaknesses, and resort to subversive, unexpected violence. Whereas I will argue that Goneril and Regan's power is ultimately compromised by their sexual desires. Kaede is able to control and wield her sexuality to devastating effect. Earlier on in the video, I described how Kaede pinned her brother-in-law and future husband Jiro to the ground, having whipped out his samurai sword in an action of swift dexterity. Well, after explaining to Jiro in no uncertain terms her demands about her future, and threatened to expose his part in the murder of Taro, she does this. Jiro initially looks terrified as Kaede moves snake-like towards him, eyes rigidly staring into his skull. He shuffles backwards, sweating, shaking, clearly wondering what on earth this extraordinary woman is going to do next. Her licking of the neck wound that she herself inflicted is vampire-esque, and Jiro can be heard sighing in pain before Kaede moves to kissing him on the lips and lies on top of him. Throughout this seduction, Kaede is utterly in control, thus subverting expectations about 16th century sexuality in which female passivity would be seen as the norm. She lies on top of Jiro. She is the first to kiss. She instigates the lovemaking. Her seduction concluded, Kaede's power over Jiro is nearly complete. The last step is to formalise her power through manipulating him into killing his current wife, Sue. Look how she starts the process, and the extraordinary contrast from her earlier role as psychotic, utterly unpredictable sword wielder.
ではわらは側室に。嫌じゃ嫌じゃ。殿はわらの殿、誰にも渡しませぬ。
泣くな、楓。そなたを側室などと考えもよ。
でも末の方様がおわす限り。
末のことは考える。
どのように。
糸間を出す。
嫌じゃ嫌じゃ。この楓、殿の肌身を知った女子は今となっては許せぬ。いえ、共に生きるのは嫌じゃ。
This scene shows Kaede's astonishing range as an actress and her ability to seamlessly switch roles in order to achieve her goals. Her crocodile tears, her rolling around on the floor, and faux possessive phrases such as "no one else shall have you" and "I can't bear that another woman has known your touch" show that she is able to conform to expectations about female behaviour when it is likely to be of benefit, as well as subvert. Here she is playing the role of the vulnerable woman, one with a love so deep and passionate that it cries out for protection from the stronger male. The viewer is left in no doubt about the artificiality of Kaede's words and actions. A close-up of Kaede's face that Jiro cannot see clearly shows the lack of any genuine tears, yet it is clear that Jiro is vulnerable to this change of approach, which appeals to his softer sides. What makes Kaede all the more powerful and dangerous is her merciless attention to detail. Jiro, following the shame and heat of illicit, blood-soaked passion, tries to get away with the vague verb phrase "attend to" when Kaede bleats pleadingly about the spectre of Lady Sue over their newfound passionate love. Kaede refuses to be fobbed off with this elusive answer and soon makes her own demand clear. Lady Sue should not remain alive, ostentatiously because she has experienced sexual liaisons with her new man. Of course, the real reason is that the removal of Lady Sue consolidates her newfound power. Whereas Kaede uses her sexuality as a tool for ruthless consolidation of power in Kurosawa's Ran, Goneril and Regan's attraction for Edmund proves their downfall in King Lear. As I previously discussed, part of the sisters' power emanated from their ability to work in tandem, which they do so brilliantly in Act 2, Scene 4. But with the pair falling for the same man, they suddenly resort to stereotypical bitching, in which nothing else matters provided they can win Edmund's heart and body. The two sisters' revised priorities are summed up in Goneril's aside in Act 5, Scene 1. On entering with her husband and their own soldiers, she says, "I had rather lose the battle than that sister should loosen him and me," with him referring, of course, to Edmund. It seems as though getting one over on each other has become as important as the prize itself. These words show that Goneril's competitive streak have overwhelmed her previously ruthless, sober judgment. The consequences of losing the battle are almost unimaginable. The overthrow of English rule, loss of power, potentially her own death. Yet Goneril has become so consumed by lust and a "win this man at all costs" attitude that she is oblivious to the folly of taking her eye off the ball at such a crucial juncture. In King Lear, as in Shakespeare's other tragedies, evil ultimately destroys itself, and in the specific case of Goneril and Regan, their power comes to an abrupt end, as first Goneril poisons Regan and then kills herself when Edmund is felled by an unknown opposite, who later transpires to be his legitimate brother. In Ran, Equal likewise destroys itself, but it becomes abundantly clear that Kaede's desire for power has stemmed from a quenchless and entirely legitimate desire for revenge. Whereas we know nothing of Goneril and Regan's past history, which might or might not illuminate why they so ruthlessly oppose their ageing father's whims. The ending to Ran shows that Kaede has consistently been motivated by the memories of past horrors. These were first revealed during a conversation to her first husband, Taro. Referring to her father and brothers, she says,
舅秀虎殿に殺められ、またこの城に住む身となったその時から、この日をどれほど待ちましたやら。母はこの部屋で自害なされた。
And once Kaede has manipulated her way into a figure of genuine influence and power within the Ikimonji clan, and has successfully led Jiro into embarking upon a war he can only use, she reveals in the final seconds of her life,
ら兄弟の恨みのこもったこの城が燃え、一文字家が滅びる様をわらわはこの目で見たかった。
Like Goneril and Regan, Kaede's power ends abruptly with her untimely death. But unlike her Shakespearean counterparts, she's been able to achieve everything she set out to do from an initial position of genuine weakness and vulnerability. So what can we conclude about female power in King Lear and Regan? Well, in both texts, women climb to positions of power, but through different means. Power is placed into Goneril and Regan's laps by a foolish patriarch, whilst Kaede successfully builds upon her domestic power base to influence and direct matters of public import. All women aim to use language to manipulate men, although Kaede has more success than Goneril, partly due to the contrasting moral values of their husbands. The women share an unsqueamish attitude towards violence and are prepared to either rapidly encourage or personally perpetuate acts of violence should it preserve or increase their own power. Finally, whereas Kaede is able to use her sexuality to seduce and subsequently control, Goneril and Regan's power comes to a fatal end following their joint sexual obsession with that bastard Edmund. This has been a Schofield on Shakespeare production exploring female power in King Lear and Regan. Thanks for watching.